When the Sun Darkens, Orbital History and 2040 AD Return of Planet Phoenix by Jason M. Breshears. Read by Kevin Stevens, also known as Grendel Dark. Chapter 10. The Joshua Comet Group. He is wise in heart and mighty in strength, which hath hardened himself against him, and hath prospered, which shaketh the earth out of her place, and the pillars thereof tremble, which commandeth the sun, and it riseth not, and sealeth up the stars. Job 9, 4-7. As planet Phoenix orbits the sun, it suffers entropy, as with everything else in the known material universe. With each pass into the inner system every 138 years, 2040 AD being the 45th orbit, at perihelion, the dead planet experiences intense gravitational and magnetospheric attraction, tension, friction, and stress as it traverses vertically across the ecliptic plane. On occasion, frozen sheets tear free from Phoenix's surface, which is riddled with fractures that break off into immense glaciers, with dust and rocks strewn within them. These in turn enter their own orbits around the sun and fragment even more into comets and asteroid trains. Phoenix is the origin of two such cometary groups. The first group we will review is the Joshua Comet Group that, by 1411 BC, when Phoenix passed through the inner system, was already 4 years behind the planet, and, upon entering the system close to the sun, this cometary group broke up and away from its gravitational nucleus and entered into its own independent orbit around the sun. It is called the Joshua Comet Group because it begins with an event in the Old Testament involving Joshua and ends with another disaster in 33 AD at the crucifixion of Christ, named Jesus, a Greek name for the Hebrew Joshua. This comet, a gigantic mountain of ice and rock debris, entered our inner solar system in the year 1407 BC between Earth and the Sun and was completely invisible as it approached dangerously close to our planet. In Canaan, the Israelites had destroyed Jericho and the Amorite garrison city of Ai, and were met with a vast host of armies led by a multitude of Canaanite and Amorite kings. The Israelites were vastly outnumbered in what amounts to be a repetition of history, mirroring the 1687 BC conflict between the Canaanite, Amorites army and the sons of Jacob, Israel, when the sun darkened by Phoenix transit. Again, here in 1407 BC, a fragment of Phoenix causes another global event. God commands Joshua, who is leading the conquest, to utterly destroy the armies before him. As earlier revealed in this work, the curse of Canaan was to be effected in this year because these people, formerly under the curse of Noah for the sexual deviancy of their patriarch, reconfirmed their accursed status by defying the law of the lots and taking residence in a land inherited by Shem and his descendants. Joshua complained to God that his request was unreasonable, due to the immense multitudes of Canaanites and their allies assembled for war, and that the Israelites could not possibly slay all of these enemies in a single day. The remedy? The Lord told Joshua to command the sun and moon to stop moving. He assured Joshua that he would aid the people in taking the land. Joshua did as he was told, and the sun stopped in the sky, and the moon ceased moving over the valley of Ajalon. A storm of stones from the sky rained upon the armies of the Canaanites and confused and decimated their hosts, while the Israelites entered the enemy ranks and cut them down, their duty requiring an additional 10 hours that the day originally could not provide. But the comet from Phoenix penetrated Earth's magnetosphere and entered into a violent gravitational gridlock that visited innumerous lightning blasts, flux tubes, between the Earth and the comet, vitrifying entire areas as quakes trembled the planet. Because the world hangs upon nothing, a fact mentioned in Job 26:7, the axial spin rate of the planet is caused by its velocity, mass, and distance from the sun. This titanic comet only resulted with a cessation of Earth's rotation and it was only for a brief period of time before the planet, rid of its intruder, resumed its normal motion. For those wanting to review a more detailed account of the event from the universal eyes of the ancients, see Appendix C. The year 1407 BC began Israel's occupation of the land of promise. The connection to Christ is more penetrating than just Joshua's name, Greek Jesus. Both mean Savior. The year 1407 BC serves calendarically as an isometric epicenter between two major historical events, both 1,407 years apart, before and after 1407 BC. The Great Pyramid was completed in the year 2815 BC, 1080 AM, an architectural calendar marking events in its internal chronometrical timelines forward and backward in time. See chronotecture. A massive edifice serving as a prophetic allusion to the coming stone kingdom and the coming of Christ, the chief cornerstone of the monument of man. The first year after the pyramid complex was completed began a 1,407-year countdown to 1407 BC, when the sun stands still for Joshua. This year itself began a 1,407-year countdown to 1 BC, the birth of Christ, the stone of Israel, whose name is actually Joshua. While this calendrical fact is interesting, even more fascinating is the orbital chronology of the Joshua Comet group and how it ends with the crucifixion of Christ in 33 AD. With its tidal struggle with Earth in 1407 BC, the comet fragmented even more with its own detritus train of fragments. It orbits the Sun at precisely 360 years. Every 220 years, the group passes under the ecliptic below the inner system and spins likewise 140 years above the ecliptic in far northern space over the inner system. We shall now review this orbital chronology. 1407 BC, 2488 AM, near collision with Earth. Our world ceases to rotate for 10 hours. Colossal comet fragment of Phoenix breaks up. Joshua leads the conquest of Canaan during disastrous episode. 220 years orbiting below ecliptic. 1187 BC, 2708 AM, no records. 140 years orbiting above ecliptic. 1047 BC, 2848 AM, no records. 220 years orbiting below ecliptic. 827 BC, 3068 AM, no records. 140 years orbiting above ecliptic. 687 BC, 3208 AM, Chinese annals report that on a clear night, the fixed stars failed to appear as something in space blocked them out. Toward the middle of the night, meteoric rains fell from the sky. 220 years orbiting Sun below ecliptic. 467 BC, 3424 AM, paralleling Thales of Miletus in every way. In this year, Anaxagoras predicted that in a certain number of days, howbeit Thales only predicted the year, a meteorite would fall from the sky, which he deducted in this the second year of the 78th Olympiad. Like Thales, Anaxagoras too, according to Ammianus Marcellinus, learned how to predict meteorites from the Egyptians. As predicted, a meteorite indeed fell and crashed into Thracia by the river Aegos, and by that very night a bright comet appeared. Another unusual parallel here is the fact that in this same year, Aeschylus composed his famous work, 7 Against Thebes, which concerned the earliest recorded war or any event in known Greek antiquity. A war which transpired in 1244 BC when a comet was seen and recorded by the Assyrians in the annals of King Shalmaneser I, when it appeared during a battle with the Hittites. By this time, the debris train of this rogue comet was extensive, created in 1407 BC, but amplified in 687 BC. This train of large fragments is demonstrated clearly in the records of history. The cometary detritus following in the wake of this gigantic and disintegrating comet appears to be falling behind in a 6 or 7 year train, the smaller fragments losing velocity. 464 BC, 3431 AM. 3 years behind the comet during the first regnal year of King Artaxerxes of Persia, Livy reported that in this year, the Romans reported strange lights ablaze in the skies, attended by other inexplicable phenomena. So disturbed were the Romans that 3 days were officially put aside and the entire city virtually closed down, wherein work was forbidden and the people packed the shrines and temples. A destructive earthquake also afflicted Sparta. 463 BC, 4332 AM. 4 years behind the comet, a plague killed many thousands of Romans as well as much livestock. 461 BC, 3434 AM. Fires blazed in the skies, and a violent earthquake shook Rome. It was also reported that it rained lumps of meat-like substance that birds devoured greedily. It took days before the meat became putrid. So strange was the event that the Senate called for a reading of the Sibylline books. This was the 6th year behind the comet. Being so far behind their parent debris train, many of these objects, having lost velocity and mass from tidal forces imposed upon them from the Sun and Earth, are torn from the comet's trajectory and enter into a tighter yet ellipsoid orbit around the Sun as the gigantic comet leaves the inner system. These fragments return 31 years later in 436 BC, before vanishing from history. Meanwhile, the main group of fragmenting pieces continues unabated. These lesser fragments reappear in 436 BC, 3459 AM. Odd and frightening things occurred in the skies, and earth tremors collapsed buildings in Italia. The plague returned with an increased mortality rate. Fragments have spread into an 11-year train, 31 years orbiting the Sun. 405 BC, 3490 AM. Debris train passes Earth unseen. No records. The following year begins disintegration of train. 404 BC, 3491 AM. Athens falls to Sparta at conclusion of Peloponnesian War. An unusual reddish rain fell in this year. 401 BC, 3494 AM. Plague in Rome is being regarded as the wrath of God. Unusually cold winter followed by record-breaking summer heat. 394 BC, 3501 AM. During the Battle of Sindus between the Greeks and the Spartans, a meteorite appeared like a beam across the sky as the Spartan fleet was defeated. As this sums up the orbital history of these fragments, which began breaking off in 1407 BC, as well as 687 BC, and then 467 BC, we now return to the unaltered orbit of the Joshua Comet Group's huge ice and rock mountain. We left off on this intriguing tangent in 467 BC, 140 years orbiting above ecliptic. 327 BC, 3568 AM. No records. 220 years below the ecliptic. 107 BC, 3788 AM. No records. 140 years above ecliptic. 33 AD, 3927 AM. This is the appearance of the Great Comet at the crucifixion in 33 AD, exactly 1,440 years, 144 times 10, or 360 times 4 years after 1407 BC, when the sun stood still for Joshua, which initiated this orbital chronology. Jesus is arrested, falsely accused, and condemned to death by a Jewish conspiracy in direct contravention to clearly established Levitical law. The Roman governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, learned from his wife, she had a terrible nightmare, about the supernatural divinity of Jesus, for she begged him not to have anything to do with his death. Her dream specifically portended a dreadful earthquake and darkening of the sun. Jesus is delivered to the Romans and is crucified on Golgotha Hill outside the city of Jerusalem to pacify the riotous Jews. A centurion pierces his side with a spear when an earthquake shakes the entire world, splitting the rocks on the hill and warping the walls of the temple enough that the massive veil is split in half that guarded the way to the most holy place. An act of God, signifying that sacrifice and ritual was no longer required for the atonement of sin, and priests were no longer needed for direct access to God. In the Gospel account, when Jesus died, the sun darkened for 3 hours. Many historians of the day remarked that in this year Phoenix darkened the sun, clearly associating the darkenings of the sun to the archaic legends of a great celestial bird immersing into the sun. The reference to Phoenix is truly astounding, especially in light of the fact that this comet's origin was from off the surface of Phoenix itself. In this event, the gigantic comet transited between the sun and the earth as much of its frozen debris burned off and formed a tail that enveloped the earth as it traveled over the ecliptic. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. Matthew 27:45. This was the height of the afternoon, when the sun is brightest in the sky. The quakes continued and shook Syria, Judea, and Lower Egypt around the Great Pyramid Complex, and we read in the Gospel of Nicodemus that a terrible darkness covered the earth. And again, it mentions the eclipse to have lasted 3 hours. Quite impossible had it been the moon. In Pilate's report to Tiberius Caesar, we learn that, by degrees the day darkened like a winter's twilight. This report to Caesar needs to be more fully examined. And when he, Jesus, was hanged upon the cross, supernatural signs appeared, and in the judgment of the philosophers menaced the whole world with ruin. There was darkness over the whole world, and the sun was obscured half a day, and the stars appeared, but no luster was seen in them, and the moon lost its brightness, as though tinged with blood. And the terror of the earthquake continued from the 6th hour of the preparation to the 9th hour. The sun was altogether hidden, and the sky appeared dark while it was yet day. Wherefore, I suppose, your excellency is not unaware that in all the world they lighted their lamps from the 6th hour unto evening. And the moon, which was like blood, did not shine all night long, although it was at the full. So dreadful were the signs that men saw both in the heavens and on the earth, that Dionysius the Areopagite is reported to have said, "Either the author of nature is suffering, or the universe is falling apart." Pilate's story is one that does not end with the scriptures. The apocryphal texts detail these reports, and further read, "Now when the letters came to the city of the Romans and were read to Caesar, with no few standing there, they were all terrified, because, through the transgression of Pilate, the darkness and earthquake had happened to all the world." Pilate was then cited to Rome, where before the Caesar he declared, "Never have I read in the works of the philosophers anything that can compare to the maxims of Jesus." He was then sentenced to die and duly executed as a believer of Jesus, his wife not suffering to live longer than he. The execution of Pilate was not inconsistent with Tiberius Caesar's reign of terror at that time, for he was, in those years, killing off all political dissidents and forcing many into banishment or suicide. Rabbi Akiba wrote that it was a dark mist that obscured the sun as the earth quaked, further quoting Celsus, an enemy of the church who also recorded this disaster. Roman archives preserved in the Vatican Library by the church historian Eubysius and the pagan writer Phlegon of Bithynia specifically detail the sun darkening and quake of 33 AD. Interestingly, one of the reasons many historians and scholars refuse to accept the gospel account of the sun darkening is because computations prove that there occurred at this time no eclipses. And as now evident, through the chronicles of the histories of this book, no eclipses are required. To darken the sun, The debris train from a comet's tail would not have to be much, considering the fact that if Earth had an 8-inch diameter, then the Sun would only be 70 feet in diameter, but it would be 1.5 miles away. That's 7,920 feet apart. A small shadow from an object transiting between the Sun and Earth would easily secure the Sun darkening effect, especially if the object was closer to the Earth than the Sun. In 1628 AD, Fernando Montesinos, a Spanish chronicler, spent decades researching the Inca and their history. He composed an extensive regnal history of Cusco in the Andean mountains of South America. This history was researched by Zachariah Sitchin with some remarkable findings. The ancient Peruvian Empire, according to Montesinos, maintained a tradition that the sun did not arrive on time, that sunrise was delayed by 20 hours in the 3rd year of the reign of King Titu Yucapacque Pachuti II, the 15th king of Cusco. Amazingly, Sitchin, working only with the data provided by Montesinos, which itself dealt only in approximates, still arrived at a date only 13 years away from the true year of 1407 BC for the solaric anomaly of the sun standing still. The parallels between the Joshua Comet group beginning and ending from 1407 BC to 33 AD, a 1,440-year span of time, are also aligned with the ancient Peruvian records. Montesinos recorded that the Inca claimed the 4th Sun age ended in the reign of the 58th king of Cusco. This is 43 kings after 1407 BC. King Titu, these having an average regnal period of 33 years, howbeit, it is recorded universally among the nations of long ago that the earliest peoples lived extraordinarily long lives. Moses died in 1407 BC, at the age of 120 years old, giving the leadership over Israel to Joshua. The ancient American civilizations of the Olmecs, Zapotecs, Inca, Maya, Tolteca, Aztecs, and others all measured the histories of their ancestors within a framework of sun ages, believing that when a sun died, it was reborn. The Phoenix cycle of 552 years is what gave rise to such a tradition. So when the sun darkened and the disaster affected the entire world in 33 AD, the Andean scholars among the Inca claimed that the 4th age was complete. We have further confirmation from India and the East of this sun darkening event in 33 AD. The traditions of Krishna antedate Jesus' presence on earth from 1 BC to 33 AD, Krishna being the physically manifested form of the god Vishnu of the Hindu Trinity. The reasons that stories of Krishna and Jesus parallel each other so perfectly, and it is astounding how parallel they are, is because the prophecies of Christ were known to the ancients thousands of years ago, but as time elapsed, these future-based texts were corrupted into doctrines that asserted that these events had already been fulfilled by local deities. In the stories of Krishna's crucifixion, a black circle appeared around the moon and the sun darkened, as the sky rained fire and ash. Flames burned as terrible calamities transpired over the earth. This concludes the Joshua Comet Group's orbital longevity and history, a group thematically related to Israel, Joshua and Jesus, as well as with the early history of Rome and later, when the Romans crucified Christ and then killed Pilate. If we followed this same orbital pattern of 360 years of the comet's pieces, 220 years under the sun and 140 over, the only other unusual event that occurs is in 1333 AD, 52:27 AM, when a single meteorite crashed into China, killing everyone within 100 miles, with noxious gases that filled the air. At this date, in 1333, strange things were recorded in the skies over China. Earthquakes swallowed entire villages, and many cities were ruined. This may in fact be a remnant fragment or the nucleus of the Joshua Comet. We now review the equally startling Vials of Phoenix Comet group.